Say something, church mouse. Chief Petty Officer Dane Kittredge had a voice built for rooms like this one. Low ceiling, wet boots steaming on the radiator. 20 men who owed him their training and about half their scars, packed onto benches in the team room of a fishing station the Navy had leased for $11 and a promise. He was standing on a folding chair. That was the part she would remember. Not the words. The chair. No, really. He put a hand behind his ear. She's been here 19 days. 19. I've heard her say 4 sentences. 4. I counted. He leaned down toward the back bench, where a small woman in a marine field jacket sat with a notebook closed on her knee. Come on, Aldana. Give the boys a whole paragraph. Christmas is coming. The room laughed. Not cruelly, most of them. That was the thing about Kittredge. He made cruelty feel like weather. You didn't argue with it, you just put a coat on. Staff Sergeant Vera Aldana was 5'3" and 119 pounds, and she did not put a coat on. She looked up. She looked at him the way a surveyor looks at a hill. Then she looked back down at her hands. See that? Kittredge spread his arms. That's the attachment. Somebody in a headquarters 90 miles from any actual water decided this troop needed a Marine. So they sent us one. And they sent us the quietest one they could find, so she wouldn't take up any space. More laughing. Somebody threw a balled-up sock. Here is what nobody in that room knew, and what you know now. In the cargo pocket of that field jacket was a notebook. In that notebook were 11 days of numbers. Bearings, off the harbor light. The height of the ferry pier's pilings at low water measured twice. The exact distance from the breakwater arm to the mooring dolphins, walked with a tape when nobody was watching, because she did not trust a laser in rain. Every morning for 11 days she had ranged the coastal ferry Andrasa at her berth, in every kind of light, and written the number down. Nobody had asked her why. Nobody had asked her anything. She did not flinch when Kittredge said her name. She did not flinch when the sock hit her boot. Her heart rate, if anyone had cared to take it, was 51. She did not yet know that in 6 days that same man would say her name into an open radio net, in front of everyone, with 214 lives on the other end of the sentence, and that saying it would take him 3 tries. If you're listening to this while you drive or lift or cook, do me one favor. Hit subscribe and drop the city you're in down in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels, because this story travels, and stay to the end. Not for the shot. Everybody remembers the shot. Stay for the moment Kittredge tries to get her name out of his mouth on an open channel and can't. And every man on that station hears him fail. That happens near the end. Don't leave before it. 6 days earlier, the coast looked like the inside of an oyster. Gray Scare Bay ran 3 miles from the fishing town of Tolvarin to the Black Rock at its mouth, and the weather came in off the open sea in shifts, like labor. Rain that arrived sideways, fog that sat down on the water and stayed, gulls that screamed all night over the fish plant. The forward site was the old harbor master's compound at the head of the pier. Cinder block, salt-eaten, a radio mast lashed with guy wires that hummed when the wind rose. The SEAL troop had been there 4 months, working the coast road with the partner nation's police, while a militia called the Kolvar Front pushed down out of the hills and tried to own the water. Vera Aldana had come in on a supply boat with 2 duffels and a rifle case, and no escort, Marine Scout Sniper. 19 days on station. Nobody had read her file, because nobody reads an attachments file. If they had, they'd have found a line about a school in the high desert where she had shot a score that was still on a board, and under it, in the instructor remarks block. 4 words from Gunnery Sergeant Thea Bracken. Do not waste her. Bracken was not dead. That mattered. Bracken was 58 and alive, and still running the school, and she still called Vera twice a year to tell her what she was doing wrong. Bracken had failed her twice. The first time for a range card, she'd copied off a data sheet instead of walking the ground. The second time for talking. You explained yourself, Bracken had said, on a firing line at 4 a.m, in a voice with no warmth in it anywhere. To me, for 11 seconds. Do you know what an explanation is? It's a handle. You hand it to them, and they carry you around by it. Every word you say out loud, somebody gets to hold. She'd taken Vera's rifle out of her hands like taking a plate off a table. Walk the ground, write it down, then don't say anything and let them find out. That was the whole philosophy. There was no wisdom in it about the wind, no story about a lake at dawn, no small worn thing pressed into her palm to keep. Bracken had given her a habit instead. Walk it, log it, say nothing. It had made her the best shooter in 3 battalions, and it had made her 19 days of a joke in a wet room. And Vera had never once considered that those 2 facts might be connected. At first light on her 9th day, she was out on the ferry pier with the notebook, and that was where Marek Vasi found her. Marek was 61 and had run the harbor at Tolvaren for 26 years, which meant he had watched 3 flags go up over his own office and had opinions about all of them. He came down the pier with 2 cups of coffee because he had seen her out there 4 mornings running and had decided that was long enough. You are measuring my pier, he said. She took the coffee. Yes. He waited. She did not continue. He laughed, a short bark of a laugh, delighted. The others talk to me for 1 hour and say nothing. You say 1 word, and I know everything. He pointed out at the gray. What is that, then? The buoy. She didn't lift the rangefinder. She didn't lift her head much at all. 940. Marek's eyebrows went up. He took a rangefinder from his own coat, because a harbor master carries one, and he shot the wreck buoy off the end of the breakwater, and he looked at the number, and he looked at her, and something in his face changed. It wasn't awe. He didn't have the vocabulary for what she was, so his face just went careful, the way a man's does when he realizes the quiet dog is a working dog. 941, he said. Tide's up. He stood there a while. Then he sat down on a bollard and started teaching her words in his own language, because he had decided she was worth the coffee, and because he had noticed that when he said a word, she wrote it in the notebook, under the numbers, in a small square hand. That afternoon, Kittredge stood in the door of the operations shack and said, loud, to nobody and everybody, "Where's the bus service? Somebody tell the bus service we need a ride at 1500. Senior Chief Augie Pell was 47 years old, ran the 2 combat craft that were the only reason the troop could touch anything on that coast, and had 11 years of this exact water in his head. He didn't look up from the chart. He said, "Bus service copies." He said it the way a man does when he has already decided the fight isn't worth the fuel. Then he went in and did the job. That night, Pell took Vera out on the bay because she asked to see the mouth of it in the dark, and neither of them said anything for 20 minutes, and it was the best 20 minutes either of them had had in 4 months. Then he cut the engines and let the boat drift and said, "Go on then." She looked. Black water, black rock, the dead lighthouse on Skier, a shadow against a shade. Rocks 406 meters off the terminal ramp. Terminal roofs 11 meters. Lighthouse Galleries 22. You've been out here 11 times. Pell nodded slowly. Then he pointed at the water off the port bow, at nothing, as far as she could see. And that? She looked for a long moment. I don't know. Set of the ebb coming round the skerry, curls back on itself, makes a slick. He said it without any pride at all, which is why she believed him. 11 years. There's things out here I know that aren't in a book and aren't going in one. He started the engines. You're the first one who said I don't know out loud in 4 months. Everybody else guesses. Guessing's expensive. Pell laughed at the water. Yeah, he said, it is. On the 6th day, the Kolvar front came into Tolvaren at 0410 in 17 vehicles, and the war stopped being 3 miles away. They took the coast road, the police post, and the fuel racks in the first 9 minutes. Kittredge's element, 8 men, plus Sergeant Thomas Brecka, and 4 of the partner nation's coastal police, had been on a routine link-up at the ferry terminal, and the routine ended with 2 technicals across the terminal approach and a machine gun on the vehicle ramp, and 8 SEALs and 5 policemen pinned in a concrete building with 1 door that faced the wrong way. In the operations shack, Lieutenant Commander Bern Halloran listened to his best chief's voice go from clipped to tight in 90 seconds, looked at the rain streaking sideways past the window, and understood 3 things at once. That the gun on the ramp had to die, that nothing he had could reach it, and that he had known for 11 days that something on his station could. "Get me Aldana," he said. The watch officer said, "Sir, the Marine's not—" "I know what she's not." Halloran's jaw worked. "I've had a shooter on this station for 19 days, who ranged that ramp in fog with her eyes, and I let a chief petty officer keep her at the back of the room, because it was easier than having the conversation. That's mine. Get her." She came in 90 seconds later with her rifle case already in her hand, because she had been walking toward the door since the first radio call. "Skier Rock," she said. Halloran stopped. "I was going to say the terminal roof." "Terminal roof's got the terminal under it." She was already looking past him at the chart. "Rock's 406 off the ramp. Crosswell'll put me in the lee. I need Pell." "You'll have Pell." She was at the door when he said, "Aldana." She turned. He didn't know how to say the thing, so he said the only version of it he had. "I should have read your file on day 1. "Read it after," she said, and went. At 0431, on a net that every man on the station monitored, a voice came up that most of them had never heard. "Gray Actual, Anvil. Anvil is set. Skier Rock, North Gallery. I have the ramp, the approach, and 400 meters of the coast road. Say the number." Halloran keyed the mic. "Say again, Anvil?" "How many are pinned?" "Say the number." A pause. 13. 13, she said. "Copy." 3 men in the operations shack looked at each other. It was flat, and it was fast, and it was the voice of somebody reading a machine's serial number off a plate. It was not the voice of a church mouse. It was the voice of the thing they had been carrying around for 19 days without ever opening the box. The lighthouse on Skier Rock had been dark since 1994. Its gallery was a rusted iron ring 22 meters above the water, and the rain came through the broken glass in sheets, and it smelled of guano and cold iron and the inside of a tin can. Vera lay on the wet steel with her rifle on a pack and her cheek on the stock and let her breathing come down. Pell had the boat tucked in the rock's lee below, engines idling, his own optics up. "Ramp guns in a sandbag horseshoe, left of the vehicle lane," he said. 2 feeding him. Truck coming up the coast road. The first shot was so much a part of the storm that Pell almost missed it. Just a heavier sound inside the wind, a flat crack that rolled out across the water and came back off the terminal wall a full second later, doubled. Down on the ramp, the gun stopped. "Down," Pell said. "One." The second and third shots came 4 seconds apart. The two men who reached for the gun did not reach it. 3. Pell's voice had changed slightly. He wasn't going to admit that yet. 60 seconds later, the truck arrived, and the militia did the thing competent men do. They didn't cluster. They went out of the truck in a spread, low, using the vehicle lane's concrete curbs, and one of them was already pointing up the bay at the rock, because he had heard the same echo Pell had and had done the geometry in his head. "They've got a thinker," Pell said. "Yes." She took the thinker first, then 2 more in 11 seconds, and the spread became a scramble, and the scramble became men behind a truck. 6, Pell said. "Aldana, that man was moving. He'd stopped. He'd stopped for about half a—" Pell shut up. In the terminal, Kittredge was on his knees below a window with a radio against his ear, listening to the ramp go quiet. And the man he had been for 6 days was starting to develop a crack he couldn't see yet. He keyed up. "Gray Actual, who is on that rock?" Halloran said, "Anvil." "Who is Anvil?" Halloran let it sit for 2 full seconds. "Take the win, Chief." Then the RPG. She saw it before she heard it, which is the wrong order, and the order that gets you killed. A white finger of light unwound itself out of the dark at the base of the crane gantry, 900 meters off, and drew a line that was not a line, but a slow, bright thread across the whole bay. And in the quarter second she did not think about the rocket at all. She thought about the gallery, about the fact that a 100-year-old iron ring bolted to a 100-year-old stone tower does not need to be hit, only near. She heard the round come, a tearing, a sound like canvas ripped along a seam, rising, and she felt the temperature of it before it arrived, felt the air move against her wet cheek, and she was already sliding backward off the pack, rifle dragged in against her chest, when it struck the tower 2 meters below the gallery floor. The world became a bell. The tower rang, and she rang inside it. The iron under her hip bone jumped and dropped. Grit and rust and old paint came down through the broken lantern glass like weather. Her ears filled with a high, steady tone, and behind it, far off, Pell's voice saying her call sign over and over, with the professionalism coming off it in strips. She did not answer for 4 seconds because she was counting. 2 more rockets at that rate. The gunner would walk them up. He was good. He had ranged her by the echo off the terminal wall, exactly the way she had ranged the wreck buoy, by walking a pier with a tape, and she felt something almost like respect, and then she put it away. She rolled left into the dead gallery's north arc, where the tower's own stone would be between her and the crane, and she came back up onto the rifle, with rust in her mouth and the tone still singing in her skull, and she waited for him to look and see nothing and lean out to see better. He leaned out. She fired. The tower rang again with a smaller, cleaner sound. 7, Pell said, and his voice had gone strange. "Anvil, you good?" Still on the rock. The second rocket team never fired. The third man of it turned and ran, and she let him run, because she had counted the coast road and knew where he was running to. And 40 seconds later, when he stopped to shout at somebody, she took the man he was shouting at. 9, Pell said. The wind swung. The rain got into her optic, and she wiped it with a wet sleeve, which did nothing, and then she stopped trying to fix it and started shooting through it, holding on the smear where a man was rather than the man. That is not a thing that can be taught. At 0508, the terminal net went quiet. She called it. Kilo 1, Anvil. Say status. Nothing. The empty channel is its own kind of sound. It is not silence. It is a soft, patient hiss. The carrier riding open, the whole bay breathing into her ear, and it means either the man has his hands full or the man does not have hands. She called again. The hiss came back. She counted 11 seconds of it, and in those 11 seconds she was aware of exactly how far 406 meters is when you cannot cross it. Then, Anvil, Kilo 1. Kittredge, and his voice had gravel in it now, and something underneath the gravel. We're moving. 13 up. We're crossing the flat. The tidal flat between the terminal and the fish plant was 200 meters of open mud, and at 0508 it was draining, and there was a crane cab at the far end of it with a gunner in it who had been waiting for exactly this. That was when Pell made his own decision. He did not ask. He shoved the throttles and brought the boat out from the rock's lee into open water at 30 knots with every light off, running a long diagonal across the mouth of the bay. And the militia skiff that had been creeping toward Scare under the shadow of the shore turned to chase him, and the crane gunner turned his head for 1.5 seconds to watch the engine noise go by. 1.5 seconds. 14, Pell said from somewhere out in the dark, sounding pleased with himself for the first time in 4 months. The skiff put 6 men on Skier Rock at 0514. She heard them come. Boots on wet stone, then on the iron stair. And the stair was a helix inside the tower, and it carried sound up like a throat. She had 11 rounds left for the bolt gun, and no time to lie down anywhere useful. And this is the part that separates a shooter from an operator. She did not try to be a sniper in a stairwell. She let the rifle down onto the gallery grating like setting down a violin, and brought the short carbine off her back, and the sound of the fight changed entirely. The long, rolling boom of the bolt gun, replaced by a flat hammering rattle that bounced off the curved stone and came back at her from every direction at once, so that for 11 seconds she was fighting inside a drum. The first man came around the last turn of the helix at 3 meters, and she was already there. The second came over him. The third fired first, and she felt the round go past her jaw close enough that her skin registered it as heat, and she felt the stone chips open her cheek, and she did not put a hand up. She stepped left into the doorway's dead space, into the arc where the helix's own curve hid her from below, and she waited with her lungs burning and the drum still ringing, and she let them come to a place where geometry was on her side. Because that is what 11 days of walking ground gives you. You know where the corners are before you need them. She could hear one of them breathing. She could hear another one whispering, fast, a prayer or a plan. She counted the boots. 4 more. Then she came out of the doorway low and shot the 4th and 5th in a second and a half, and the 6th turned to go back down the helix and fell down it instead. 15, she said into the net, because Pell couldn't see it. Her voice hadn't moved. 16, 17, 18, 19, Skier is clear. In the operations shack, nobody said anything for a while. She was reloading the bolt gun when Kittredge's element came off the flat, and the crane cab opened up on them at last, and she put 1 round through the cab's rear window at 480 meters through rain with a smeared optic, and the crane gun stopped mid-burst. 19, Pell said. He'd come back into the lee. His voice was very careful. That's 19. At 0603, she was in the fish plant, with the bolt gun slung and her sleeves pushed up, kneeling in the wet on a concrete floor next to Sergeant Tomas Brecka of the Tolvaren Coastal Police. And the same hands that had done all of that were doing this. He was 38. He had been hit crossing the flat, and his men had carried him. And now he was gray and cold and going somewhere, and the corpsman was 14 minutes out working on somebody else. And Vera had a med pouch and a jacket cut open and a job. "Talk to me," she said. He said something. It wasn't English. So she answered him in his own language. Badly. 12 days of a harbor master's coffee and a notebook. The words written small under the bearings. And she got maybe 1 in 3 right, and she said them anyway. And the effect on that man was like a light coming on in a house. He grabbed her wrist. He held it. "Thomas, look here. Look at me." She had her weight on him, both hands, working without looking at his face, which is a thing you learn. "What's in 6 days?" "Wedding." His eyes were sliding. "My brother. I stand up for him." "Where?" "Ristva. The church on the—" He stopped. Then in English, "Small. And this is a 38-year-old policeman with a wife, and 9 years on the job, and he sounded like somebody at the bottom of a well. Am I going to make it? Tell me true. Am I going to make the wedding?" She did not pause. She did not soften it. She said it the way you say arrange. "You're going to be late." He looked at her, and you could see the sentence go all the way in and hit the floor of him. Not a comfort, not a maybe. A fact about the future, delivered by somebody who had not been wrong yet about anything. His whole body came down a notch. He started breathing on purpose. "Late," he said. "Late." Her hands didn't stop. "They'll seat you at the back. You'll hate it." He laughed. It cost him. He kept hold of her wrist the whole 9 minutes until the corpsman got there, and when they took him, she stood up and looked at her hands for exactly 1 second and then went and picked up her rifle. By 0640, the district was retaken. The technicals were burning. The Kolvar front was pulling back up the coast road, and the police were coming out of doorways, and Marek Vasi was standing on his pier, in the rain looking at the rock, at the dead lighthouse, and doing arithmetic he did not enjoy. It was over. It was, for about 11 minutes, completely over. At 0651, the coastal ferry Andrasa, 5,000 tons, 42 years old, the only way out of Tolvaren that wasn't the coast road, blew her horn twice at the ferry berth and began to move, and she had 214 people on her. The Kolvar front had not been withdrawing. They had been walking backward toward the water, and 40 of them had gone up the Andrasa's stern ramp while everyone watched the coast road, and now they had her crew, her passengers, dock workers, and evacuees, and the harbor's whole day shift, every one of them an adult who had been told an hour ago that the ferry was the safe place. The Andrasa backed off the berth, came around, and stopped 640 meters out with her bow into the storm, engines turning just enough to hold, and a man came up on the ship's public channel and on every emergency frequency in the bay at once. His name was Ruvan Ostroga, and he had a voice like a radio host. "To the Americans on the pier, we have your ferry. We have opened the fuel transfer to the vehicle deck. There is a great deal of it, and I am holding the pump. You will withdraw from Tolvaren by 0715. If any boat leaves that pier, I let go of what I am holding." A pause for the timing. "There is no negotiation. There is a clock. Please spend it well." 24 minutes. Halloran had Pell's 2 boats and 11 men who could still fight. The plan wrote itself, and it was terrible. 2 craft, Low approach in the ferry's blind arc under the flare of her bow hooked the stern platform up onto the vehicle deck. 40 seconds from the moment the first grapple touched steel to the moment the assault reached the bridge ladder. 40 seconds during which a man on the bridge with his hand on a pump control would hear the boats and would do what he had promised. "That's not a plan," Kittredge said. He was standing in the operations shack, soaked with rust and mud on him, and for the first time in 4 months he was standing very still. "That's 40 seconds of hope." "Then find me 39, Halloran said. Out on the water, Pell had his optics on the ferry's bridge, and he was not looking at the man. He was looking at the ship. "Gray Actual, bus service." He'd said the name himself, flatly, and nobody laughed. "I've ridden that boat 100 times. Ostroga's talking to us on the ship's radio right now, from inside the wheelhouse. Bulletproof glass on the front, steel either side. Can't touch him in there." "So he stays in there," Halloran said. "No, sir." Pell's voice sharpened. "He doesn't. That's the thing. He's making an ultimatum to a town. He's not going to deliver the last one on a radio. That boat's got loud hailers on the outside, port and starboard bridge wings, and the microphone is on a bracket on the wing itself. It doesn't reach inside. I know because I watched a master use it every single crossing for 11 years. A beat. At 0715, he is going to want the whole harbor to hear him with their own ears. He'll step out on the starboard wing, he'll speak into that bracket, and it will take him about 2 seconds. And it'll happen exactly once, because after he says it, there's nothing left to say." Halloran stared at the chart. 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Once. From the pier, you can't see the starboard wing. The ferry's own superstructure is in the way. From the rock, the angle's dead. There's one place on this bay with a line onto that wing. Pell said it like a man laying down a card. The outer arm of the breakwater, 640, in this. And the wings boxed. You've got the lifeboat davit on one side, and the mast stay on the other. Call it 40 centimeters of daylight at that range, and the ship's rolling 4 degrees, and it's dark, and it's raining, and the laser won't read through this to save your life. Silence in the shack. "Nobody can make that shot," the watch officer said, which is when Chief Petty Officer Dane Kittredge walked to the radio and put his hand on it and did not key it. He stood there. 8 seconds. He was thinking about a folding chair, about a small woman in a field jacket with a closed notebook on her knee and a rate of 51, and how he had needed, for 19 days, for her to be nothing, and he was only now finding out what that need had been made of. He keyed it. "Anvil, this is Kilo 1. His voice broke on the first syllable of her call sign, and he had to stop and start again. Every man on the station heard it. "Anvil, Kilo 1. Nothing. He shut his eyes. "Vera, Staff Sergeant Aldana. It's Kittredge." The empty channel hissed at him for 3 seconds, and he had earned every one of them. 214 people, he said, and his voice went out entirely on the last word and came back in pieces. 214. There's nobody else. I need you to... He stopped. He put his forehead against the bulkhead. Everyone watched him do it. "Please," the net hissed. "Then level." "I'm listening." She went out along the breakwater arm on foot, because a boat could not live out there, and the sea came over the concrete in green slabs every 15 or 20 seconds. And she went out anyway, low, with the rifle case dragged behind her on a strap. 400 meters of that. She got to the outer head and put herself down in a notch behind a mooring block, and the water came over her and kept coming over her. And each time it did, she held her breath and held the rifle up out of it, and let the rest of her be under water in the dark. In a storm, on a wall, 640 meters from a ferry with 214 people on it. And they saw her. Of course they saw her. A machine gun on the Andrasa's afterdeck opened at 0708 and walked its rounds down the breakwater arm toward her. And this is what that is. First, you hear it a full second before it arrives. A distant industrial stitching. And then the sea in front of you comes apart in a line of small white flowers, and then the concrete starts sparking and screaming. Chips going past your face like insects. And the wall you are lying on begins to transmit each strike up through your ribs so that you feel the gun before you feel the fear. She did not move. She could not move. There was nowhere on that wall to go. And so she lay in the surge, with her cheek down, and did the only thing left, which was arithmetic. She ranged the afterdeck by the mill relation, off the ferry's boat deck rail, a number she had in the notebook, because she had measured it 11 times at a berth in the rain. She held. She fired once. The stitching stopped. 20, Pell said from somewhere. Anvil, they'll send more. They will. They did. Over the next 4 minutes, off the afterdeck and the stern ramp, she took 11 more, one at a time, in the dark, from inside the water, and the count climbed in Pell's ear like a temperature. 31, he said at 0713, and then quieter. Anvil, 2 minutes. She got the rifle up onto the block. Water came over. She let it. Underneath her sternum, there was nothing at all where a nervous system should have been. No keepsake to press, no lucky thing, no small worn object, because Bracken had never given her one and had thought people who needed them were being lied to. What Bracken had given her was in the cargo pocket, and it was already spent. 11 days of numbers, walked and written down, so that now, when the laser died in the rain and the world was black and moving, she could range a ship by its own dimensions out of memory, walk the ground, write it down, then don't say anything and let them find out. She got the Andrasa's foremast in the glass. She found the davit. She found the stay. Between them, a slot of nothing. 641 meters. She dialed it. The ship was rolling, and the slot swung with it, opening and closing like a mouth deciding whether to speak, and the rain was coming into her optic, and she stopped fighting it and started reading through it. Anvil, Pell said. 30 seconds. He'll come out on the starboard wing. He'll be there for about 2. He will not come out twice. Copy. There's no second try on this one. There never is. Wind at her back, quartering, 11 knots by the way it pushed her collar, a 2-degree tilt in the rifle she felt in her shoulder and corrected without deciding to. The ship's roll. She stopped counting it, because counting is for people who have time. She did the other thing, the thing that has no name. She stopped being a person watching a ship and became a part of the ship's motion, writing it in her chest, her body doing the arithmetic her mind was too slow for. The sea came over her. She held her breath and let it. It went. She was still on the glass. Then a door opened on the starboard bridge wing, and yellow light fell out onto wet steel, and a man stepped into the slot. 214 people, 40 centimeters, 641 meters. Dark. Rain. 2 seconds. He reached for the bracket, and Staff Sergeant Vera Aldana, who had said 4 sentences in 19 days and had never once explained herself to anyone, did not say anything now either. She let the wall lift her, and she let it set her down, and somewhere in the bottom of that motion, in the 1/8 of a second, where a 5,000-ton ship is neither rising nor falling, and hangs in the middle of its own breath, She pressed the trigger straight back. The report went out across the whole bay and rolled off the hills at the head of it, and came back 9 seconds later. And by then the yellow light on the starboard wing was empty, and the man was on the deck, and his hand had never closed. The clock read 07:14:51. The boats hit the stern platform 4 seconds later. "Anvil," she said. Water came over her. She waited it out. "Anvil, engagement complete. 1 round expended. Starboard wing is clear. The wing is clear. Go." They went. 40 seconds. 11 men up a stern ramp into a vehicle deck, and it was ugly, and it was fast. And at 07:18, Kittredge came up on the net with his voice absolutely destroyed and said, "Gray actual, Kilo 1. Bridge is ours. Fuel transfer is secured. 214. 214 souls." And then nothing for a second. And then, "Tell her 214. Nobody believed it. That's the part people forget. By noon, the story had reached the task force, and the task force had reached back down and said, in the language such places use, that this had not happened. 641 meters at night in a storm, from a wall that was underwater half the time, on a 2-second exposure, through a gap you could cover with a paperback, on a rolling hull, with a laser that could not have read the range, and therefore did not, and a marine attachment nobody at that headquarters could pick out of a lineup. A staff officer used the word embellishment on an open call. Kittredge, standing in the operations shack, went white and started to come out of his chair, and Halloran put a hand flat on his chest. "Don't," Halloran said. "Watch." Because the Andrasa was 42 years old and had been refitted in a Dutch yard in 2019 and had a security camera on each bridge wing and a voyage data recorder in a steel box on her boat deck that swallowed every second of every crossing, whether anyone wanted it to or not. They pulled the box at 1400. The wing camera had it in 3 frames. Frame 1, a man stepping into yellow light, reaching for a bracket. Frame 2, the same man. Frame 3, the light empty. Between frame 2 and frame 3, 1/30th of a second. The audio channel had the ship's own microphones, and on them, faint, arriving 9 seconds after the fact, the sound of the report rolling in off the hills, which let a Dutch engineer at a desk 2,000 miles away do the one calculation nobody had asked for, and time-stamp the origin of the sound to a point on the outer breakwater arm and put a number on it, 641 meters. The staff officer who had said embellishment called back on a secure line and asked to speak to the shooter and was told the shooter was asleep. Marek Vasi gave a statement too, and Marek, who had watched the whole thing from his pier through a harbor master's glass, was not interested in numbers. He said one sentence, and then he wouldn't say any more. 31, Pell told the debrief when they made him go through it. He said it looking at the table. 31, across both, confirmed. And I called every one of them out loud as it happened. So if anybody wants to argue with the number, argue with me. He looked up. The last one isn't on the list. The last one's not a number. The last one's why 214 people walked off a boat this morning. She came into the team room at 16:20. Low ceiling, wet boots on the radiator, 20 men on the benches, the same room, the same folding chair, still standing in the middle of the floor where nobody had wanted to touch it. Kittredge saw her first, and he stood up. Then Coyne stood up. Then Booth. Then all of them, the whole troop, on their feet in a wet room with a scraping of benches. And Kittredge brought his hand up in a salute he had absolutely no regulation right to render to a Marine Staff Sergeant, And every man in that room did it with him anyway, because there was nothing else available to them, and they were not going to just sit there. She stood in the doorway and let them. Then Kittredge came across the floor. He got about halfway and stopped. His hands were shaking, and he let them. He had rehearsed something on the pier for an hour, and it had all left him. He stopped. Started again. There's a thing I want to say, and it's going to come out wrong, so. He swallowed. I stood on that chair. He pointed at it without looking at it. I stood on a chair, in front of my guys, and His jaw locked. He waited it out. When he spoke again, his voice was almost gone. I made you small, because it was easier than finding out what you were. That's the whole thing. That's all it ever was. I knew there was something in you on about day 3, and I got loud instead, because if you were nothing, then I didn't have to. He couldn't finish it. 20 men watched a chief petty officer come apart in a wet room, and not one of them looked away, because he had not looked away either for 19 days, when it was her. I'm listening, she said. And he broke properly then, and got the rest of it out in pieces. And it took him a long time, and she stood there, and let it take as long as it took. It was the 3rd time in the whole story that she had said those 2 words, and each time they had meant something different, and this time they meant, finish it. I'll wait. You don't get to leave it half said. When he was done, he came to attention in front of her, which was the only thing left, and the room stayed on its feet. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Sit down." He sat down. Everyone did. Halloran was in the doorway. He didn't make a speech. He'd already given one to himself at 0431, and it had cost him what it was going to cost. "Aldana," she turned, "you're not an attachment anymore. As of this morning, you own the sniper element on this station. It's yours, the billet, the training pipeline, both craft crews for insert, and Senior Chief Pell's answers to you for anything with water under it. A beat. That's not a reward. That's me fixing something I broke on day 1. Understood, sir." That evening, Marek Vasi came down the pier with 2 cups of coffee, because he had decided 4 mornings running was long enough, and this was the 12th. He handed her one. He looked out at the Andrasa, dark at her berth with her lights on, and 214 people long since walked home. He'd been holding his sentence all day. "My cousin was on that boat," he said. 54 years old. She stacks fish for a living, and she has never, in her life, had anything to do with anybody's war. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and was not embarrassed. "I gave you coffee because I thought you were a strange, quiet girl, measuring my pier for no reason." His voice went. "You were measuring my pier so my cousin could go home. 19 days. Nobody knew. You never said one word." She looked at the water. "Why?" Marek said. "Why do you never say?" And Vera Aldana, who had been given a habit instead of a philosophy, said the only true thing she had. "Because they'd have argued." She drank the coffee. "You can shout down a word. You can't shout down a hit." She called Bracken at 2140 on a bad line from a cinder block room that smelled of salt. 58 years old, still running the school, still awake at that hour, because that is when she was worth anything. She listened to the whole thing without a sound. She had failed this woman twice and had written 4 words in a remarks block and had never once told her that she'd done it on purpose. "Did you explain yourself?" Bracken said. "To any of them, at any point?" "No." "Good." A long pause. The line hissed like an empty channel. 19 days of that, and you never handed them the handle." "No, Gunny." Another pause. And Bracken, who had no wisdom about lakes, and had never given anybody a token to press against their chest, and had built this woman out of walked ground and written numbers in silence, said, in a voice she'd have denied later, "They stood up?" The whole room. "Huh," said Gunnery Sergeant Thea Bracken, and hung up before it could get worse. At 04:55, the next morning, Vera Aldana walked out along the ferry pier in the dark with her notebook in her cargo pocket and Pell's boat idling at the steps, and the storm broken up into rags on the horizon. She was going out to Scare Rock to walk the ground again, because there was more of it now, and it was hers. And because in 6 days, a policeman named Tomas Breka was going to stand up at his brother's wedding in Ristva, late, seated at the back, hating it. She had a small scar coming in on her cheekbone from the stairwell. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were level, and her stride was even, and she went down the wet steps into the boat without hurrying. And she did not look back at the compound once. And back in the team room, where the radiator ticked and the boots were finally dry, Dane Kittredge sat alone on the back bench in the dark, in her seat, with the folding chair still standing out in the middle of the floor where he'd left it. He'd come down to move it, and had not been able to. He sat there a long time, trying to reassemble the man who had stood on that chair, trying to find the joke, the actual joke, the specific funny thing that 20 men had laughed at, and he could not find it. It was gone. It had never been there. There had only ever been a small woman with a closed notebook on her knee, saying nothing, letting him find out. Out on the black water, an engine came up and ran for the rock and faded.